Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this penultimate session of WTM London this year. My name's Damon Embling. I'm a journalist with Euronews, specialising in travel and tourism, and I'm going to be moderating this session this afternoon, which is all about that big B word. So let me introduce the panel that I've got alongside me here. We've got Kerry Douglas, who's the head of programme at the Institute of Travel Management, ITM, bringing together all those that work in large companies looking after business travel. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Damon.
We also have Luca Petheridge, who's the Director of Public Affairs at APTA, the Travel Association, of course, representing travel agencies, travel platforms, travel operators. Hi to you. Also, we have Diane Palumbo, who's the Director of Sales and Marketing at Ski World, and you also represent an organisation called Seasonal Businesses in Travel, or ESPIT. So welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to all of you for joining us. So the conversation here over the past few days, a lot of it has obviously been about COVID and how that's really devastated the travel and tourism sectors. But obviously looming in the background has been this big B word, the Brexit that happened when Britain left the European Union. Transition period ended right at the end of last year. Diane, let's just start with you. Has COVID in some terms sort of overshadowed Brexit, and has Brexit sort of been pushed to the sidelines in terms of travel and tourism? What's been the impact so far?
I think for businesses like ours just about to operate for the winter season, we're realising on a very, say, superficial level that we can't take our Christmas crackers and our Yorkshire tea and several other things to many of our catered properties as we would normally. So that's a very superficial aspect. But I think for many other people in the room as well, the other challenge we've got is our staffing. You know, at Ski World, we used to employ 460 young people aged between 18 and 34. Hard to believe, but I was one of them all those years ago. And now, this year, we've shrunk to 112, and every single one of those has to have a work permit, it has to have a visa, has to have their passport stamped, lots of proofs of identity and different medical and insurance. So a level of bureaucracy which is unbelievable. Now, if you then get me on the subject of the contracts that we're trying to sign with suppliers, GDPR, we'd be here all afternoon.
And Luke, in terms of the members that you represent at APTA, why are we still talking about Brexit?
Well, Diane's touched upon some of the challenges that we are going to face. Of course, people have been travelling less during COVID, so I think we've seen fewer problems than maybe we might have seen had that not been the case. But our members have reported challenges to us around mobility, getting staff into the European Union, about tax and changes that countries are making because they're realising that suddenly this competitor on their doorstep that used to be part of a tax harmonisation regime is no longer part of that and is competing with their businesses. And consumers as well. There are a number of issues around passport validity, for example, that are catching people out. So we're talking about it because it's having an impact on business and it's having an impact on travellers.
And you specialise, Kerry, in the business travel sector. Is Brexit really now dawning on businesses that are heavily involved in sending their staff all over the place?
Absolutely. And when you look at the fact that, for the past 18 months, there really hasn't been much business travel. We're only at the point now where business travel is starting to return and, our corporate travel managers are starting to prepare their business and their travellers alike. But really, very similar to the conversation already, mobility is a key issue and cross-border travel is a major issue when it comes to Brexit.
Because if we break down business travel, there are all sorts of different types of business travel, right? I could go to a meeting for one day and then come back to the UK. In the past, I might have been sent away for a few weeks to work in a country. It could be longer. Is it a bit of a minefield now in terms of the different rules and regulations around the different types of business travel?
Well, there is, and there's actually a number of factors also at play when it comes to EU legislation and regulation around business travel. Perhaps in the past there hasn't been such strong enforcement of certain regulation around things like the Posted Worker Directive, but that has been increasing. And whilst it's not directly related to Brexit, it does impact on exactly what you mentioned, the different type of trip and the activity. So whether you're going on assignment, or whether you're going on project work, or whether you're just going on a business trip. But the key challenge is that now each one of the EU member states all have a slightly different variation of how they have transposed the amended Posted Worker Directive into their actual national legislation.
Because Diane, I mean, we think of the European Union and they bill themselves as one happy family with all the sort of synchronization across the bloc, but it's not really like that, is it?
No, I think it's always been more complicated, but because we've been part, it's a bit like my family. When you're part of it, you don't notice the problem so much.
Yeah.
And it's almost like breathing. It's been an unconscious reflex that we have taken for granted so much of the communality of it. So for our staff to be able to get onto a coach and go over to France, it's almost been the same as going to Edinburgh for, to work the Edinburgh Festival or something. So I think now that we're out, the sheer complexity of us as an SME marketing to French nationals. Oh, by the way, we're also marketing to Austrian nationals. Oh, we do have a French company, and we also have an Austrian company, but is that the same as the Swiss company? It's now throwing a spotlight onto precisely that complexity, which, let's face it, that's what the founding fathers of the EU wanted to avoid, and here we are.
Luke, what do you make of this?
Well, I think it's throwing up a number of challenges. Mobility is probably the best example to get to here. We used to deal with one European Union kind of regime, really, in freedom of movement and the Posted Workers Directive. We're now dealing with 27 immigration regimes, and that doesn't just impact the longer-term stays, people that are there for perhaps a ski season that Diane will be able to talk about in far more detail than me, but it also impacts short-term stays. So, as I say, you have that rule where you're only allowed in the country for 90 and any 180 days to carry out your tasks. That's going to impact those longer stays, but for shorter term stays, we used to not have to worry about the mutual recognition of professional qualifications directive, because as a member of the European Union, broadly, wasn't perfect, ski in particular, the countries would respect each other's qualifications. Now we're no longer part of that, and it isn't just, as I say, those longer term roles, it's also, if you're a tour guide, for example, going to certain countries, if you go to France, for example, you have to be an EU national to be a tour guide in France. So that's no longer possible. Yeah. Malta, you have to have the local Maltese certificate. As a member of the European Union, they would recognize that it's not a professional qualification in the UK, and as a member of the European Union, they would say, okay, that's fine, we recognize you are a tour guide, you can come here and work. That's no longer the case. You will have to have that local qualification or an equivalent from another European member state. So these are real sticking points for the industry. Yeah.
Kerry, it sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare. I mean, obviously you're going to have very large companies that are involved in business travel. A lot of them have global mobility teams, right? They have experts within their company that specialize in having already sent Brits to other countries outside the European Union. So maybe they've got a head start, but what's it like across the board for those smaller companies, medium enterprises? How are they making sense of this and actually thinking about what they need to do and when they need to do it?
Indeed. I mean, actually for the larger companies, it's still quite a problem. Going back to what Luke mentioned, previously, pre-pandemic and before, we transitioned out of the EU and before the amended Posted Worker Directive came into play, global mobility teams in many large organizations really took responsibility for those longer-term assignments. And day-to-day, short-term business travel was really just something where people booked their trip and away they went. That's not the case anymore. So now you have this big question within a large corporate organization of who is taking responsibility for short-term business trips and making sure that the business are compliant in what's now required when you go on business to the EU. So for the big organizations, there's a challenge because short-term business travel tends to sit firmly at the travel manager's door. And they now need to be involved with some of the other stakeholders across the business to find how they fill this gap. On the other side, for those smaller-sized organizations, it's a challenge, and really, given the complexity of what's required to know that you're compliant, it really is looking towards some of those third-party specialists in immigration and social security. But that does come with a cost, and a financial implication to pay for that.
So it comes with a cost, there's complications. So Luke, not only with COVID and the problems that's caused, the climate emergency, the pressure on companies to be much more green in deciding when they need to do business travel genuinely, combined with Brexit, does this mean business travel is going to start dying in the UK in terms of us sending people abroad as much?
I don't think it will die. I think there will be perhaps a more selective approach from businesses. I mean, you have
it's going to be on Zoom more than anything.
Well, perhaps it's a mix and match, isn't it? So there may be some meetings you could do on Zoom, but ultimately, I mean, Diane was talking about this before we came on stage. There are a number of European countries where the culture is actually, a little bit different. That pressing the flesh is really important. So I don't think business travel is going to die or to stop as a whole, I think there will be a selection taking place within companies, balancing those kind of days that you're allowed in the EU, balancing things like, is it something that requires a visa? Is it something you can still do under the trade deal? But no, I don't believe business travel is going to die off.
Okay, Diane, you specialise in the ski season, obviously. The ski season is upon us, the winter season.
First snow's fallen.
The first snow is falling, but what does this actually mean now, specifically in terms of getting the people in the right places, not only in terms of the travellers, but actually the staff that you would have traditionally put in those places? Because you would have had the people working in chalets, you would have had the tour representatives in those areas. How are you dealing with that now? What's some of the solutions you're finding around that? Are there any solutions?
So there was I heard a slightly hysterical laugh then, because not all the solutions have been found. We've given up on Christmas crackers. We're not taking Christmas pudding over. We've got a quick-fire recipe for Christmas pudding for some of the chalets. The uniform that we have already in France is because we shipped it out before December the 31st last year. So we've been paying for storage for all of that uniform. Any replacements we're going to have to buy from manufacturers in France. And the big thing is staffing. Because any ski season, you're going to have people dropping out during the season. It's a dangerous mountain sport, so people will twist knees, break ankles. Actually, not that much, so don't be put off. It's not like that at all, but you spend a whole season skiing hard, there's going to be things that happen. And now we can't just put somebody on a plane and get them out to keep up the same levels of service. So we're over-recruiting, and then turning to EU nationals, because we're a large enough company to have a company in France, to have a French payroll, but many of the members of ESPIT are just not in that position at all. So at some stage, that is going to filter through in terms of a change of business model or a change of service from many of those smaller SMEs. So some of the solutions, I'm sleeping on them.
You talk about ESPIT, the Seasonal Businesses and Travel Organisation that you represent. What have been some of the things coming through that? I know you said that most days your WhatsApp is going crazy with loads of messages coming through from members. What's the point of that group, and how are you helping each other through this?
Well, let me begin by saying I'm a Francophile. I love France, and we talked about the bureaucracy in France being as prevalent as Pernod is. That's just a way of living. Some of the issues come down to what are the business reference numbers that you put on your work permit applications for staff. Is it the property where they're working? Is it the property where they're staying? Is it your company number? And sometimes we have several company numbers. So that, amongst the 100 or so companies who are on ESPIT, we have a big WhatsApp group. Somebody will ask the question, somebody else who's done it will reply. So it is the best use of social media I've ever come across, aside from promoting the wonderfulness of ski world and skiing. And it's an average of about 100 exchanges over all that kind of thing. Can I employ somebody from Guernsey? What are you doing about Christmas crackers? Sorry to go on. Big part of Diane's Christmas is Christmas crackers.
Luke, why do you think there are still so many questions swirling around travel and tourism about Brexit? I mean, what's broken down here? Has the industry not been speaking closely enough to each other? Have they not prepared enough? Have governments not been giving enough information? Is the EU... Well, I mean, should they help is the question, but have they been doing enough to kind of make things clear as well?
Well, I think it's probably threefold. I think partially it's awareness, because people haven't been travelling as much. So, as I say, the niggly issues haven't been coming up. So there isn't a general kind of public awareness about some of these things and the fact that they need to be resolved. I think actually the industry, one of the benefits of the last year has been the industry, or the last couple of years, the last 5 years now, it feels like forever, to be honest, the industry has really come together. We've worked very closely with ESPIT. There's been lobbying of the UK government and of the European Union before we left to make sure that we were covered as much as we could in the trade deal. But there's been fantastic lobbying done by ESPIT in France, that practical, on-the-ground kind of evidence-based lobbying, saying to them, this is what this industry is worth for you, and you need to find a solution in order to protect those local economic benefits that accrue to the French ski resorts. Unfortunately, they have done that on a unilateral basis, at least for this coming year, in order to issue those work permits, those visas, and that's brilliant. That's the sort of thing that we need to do more of as an industry. I think in terms of government, there is a recognition that there has been less capacity in government over the last 18 months to be focused on these issues. I mean, we've gone through a global pandemic. I think the government, perhaps in the transition period, wasn't able to engage with business in the way that we would have liked them to have done But that's, as I say, a process of the pandemic. I think as we go forward, we need to continue to engage with government. Certainly that's my job, so I will be doing that, working with SBIT and others across the industry. But there are solutions here. I think the Youth Mobility Scheme, which I'm sure we'll come on to, is a real tangible solution that could help to partially resolve this issue. It's not going to help everybody, it only applies to those under 30, but it's a regime that's already in place. We have it with countries like Australia, New Zealand. Why would we not extend that to France, to Spain, to Germany, where we have mutual tourism flows that are of benefit to both countries?
Diane, let's just elaborate on that youth mobility scheme that you would like to see happen in an ideal world from your perspective. I mean, how would that help, and how can you envisage that would ever happen?
Well, I think, first question, how would it help? I am a product of, I was going to say I'm a product of the EU, but all my career experience in travel came from working overseas. And you come back to whichever company you work for with all of that experience. And to lose that for future generations in my world, and certainly for our office, 99% of the people in our office ski and have worked seasons. Well, I worry in the future that I'm going to be able to boast that, and of course that has a direct implication for the information we give to customers, because it is a specialist interest holiday. So what do we stand to lose? Well, we lose the ability to invest in those future generations to build UK PSC for all of those kind of things. And I think the other thing that we need to remember is people will not stop wanting to travel. That's never going to go away. Actually, what we need to do is to build for the future. We were talking, we don't want to be moaning about Brexit all the time. And the key thing is say, what are the learns from it and what do we need to develop? And the Youth Mobility Scheme, for me, as well as much communality in things like GDPR, the PTRs, our businesses, I'm sure everybody in this room is the same. We need stability and we need a degree of certainty. And that's what we've had over the last 20 years. And I pray that message gets through to government.
But I mean, that requires the political will of the UK government. It also requires the political will of the EU and EU member states on an individual basis. I mean, Kerry, people in the EU might watch this debate today and say, well, just get on with it. I mean, you dug your hole, now just go and lay in it. And this is your problem. I mean, deal with it. What would you say to that? I mean, why should the EU listen to the travel and tourism industry in the UK saying we want a youth mobility scheme?
Well, I think, certainly when you look at how important the trade is between, the EU member states and the UK as well, it's exceptionally important. And it's multifaceted in the sense that it's not just about Brexit and some of the regulation that's come in through that. There are other EU legislation that's come into play that affects all member states in terms of the mobility of people cross borders. So whether you're a French national employed in France moving to work or be posted to work in the Netherlands, a lot of this legislation and some of these challenges face all of those employees as well. So yes, Brexit is a challenge, but again, there is opportunity that we can try to look to build systems, or actually the collaboration that we've had across our industry and actually within our organisations for our members who manage travel. It's given them a great opportunity to really level up within their organisation, become consultants within their organisation, and really raise the profile and the value that business travel brings to an organisation.
Luke, is the British government in the mood for listening over all of this?
Yeah, I think they are. We're coming through, hopefully, into a recovery period. There will be more space. We will be engaging with them. They have expressed a willingness to consider the youth mobility scheme. I think we need to get them from a place where it's a kind of passive, if somebody has the conversation with me, I'm open to it, to a more proactive, recognising that this is an industry that employs over 500,000 people pre-pandemic, and it's worth about £37 billion to the UK, and actually they should be out there advocating for us, as opposed to just waiting for somebody to knock on the door and say, can we have this agreement? But to your earlier point about, why would the European countries do this? Yeah. Well, again, 37 billion euros, which is what our tourism is worth to them every year, and it supports 900,000 jobs across the European Union. So that is why they should be engaging.
Yeah, but do you think they can get beyond Brexit?
I think we have in some areas.
Some think that we betrayed the European Union.
Clearly, there are political challenges. I mean, if you look outside and think about fish, then certainly that is the case. But we are already getting beyond some of the initial challenges of Brexit. If you look when we left, on the day that we left the European Union, you needed a green card to drive across the European Union to prove that you have car insurance. We've got rid of that. You needed an international driver's permit to drive in Spain or France. We've got rid of that. So there are deals being done. We just need to make sure we're on the agenda as one of those future deals.
Because I guess, Diane, I mean, for the government here, it is a difficult one, because if they seem to be watering down Brexit too much, it's obviously going to antagonise those that voted for Brexit. Where does the balance come, do you think? I mean, how far should the EU and the UK governments go in making life easier for travel and tourism?
They need to go as far as protecting the incomes, the health, the wealth of their nations. I mean, that's the big point for me, that if a government serves the interest of a population, then they will, in Angela Merkel style, and I think she's a goddess, of course, sit down and say, there has to be a pragmatic solution to this. Because I think all of us in business, we don't arrive at the table with our suppliers in an angry way, with a political way, and say, right, we're going to win this one, this is what's going to happen. We sit down at the table, even though we know those negotiations are going to be hard, a bit easier if they're fueled with a glass of red wine, but they're going to be tough, saying, it's in our mutual interest to secure an agreement. So what I would say is we have gone through a highly politicized period. I get it. I wasn't in agreement, but we are where we are. And we're business people. And fundamentally, business is what pays our mortgages. It pays our food bills. It pays our rising energy bills. For goodness sake, sit down and work with us, because there will be a way forward.
And finally, on business, Kerry, what are you saying to the government, and what lobbying are you doing on behalf of your members?
Well, it's ITM's an individual membership organisation, so we don't proactively lobby the government. We work alongside our partners. We're the UK representative of GBTA, and we also work to support other associations in terms of lobbying efforts. But really, in terms of what we do with our members, is we work to try and educate and inform and share within the community some of the key areas that they can use to develop their own remit and their own information going back into their organisations to then take forward in many various different aspects of conversation. But I think certainly from a business travel perspective and from our members' perspective, it is about raising the discussion within their organisations, about working with the specialists to support a more effective or easier way of doing business across the EU. And again, it's looking for those opportunities. As an association, we have worked with the UK government to try and educate around Brexit and what that means for business travellers. But yes, certainly it's something that we look to try and raise the discussion and look at where we can present what we would like to see as a solution, such as a more unified set of rules and a more unified and simplified application process for visas, for work permits, rather than 27 variations of something that's very different.
Okay, we talked a lot about business travel and Brexit and a bit about politics, a bit more politics a bit later on. But Luke, also the leisure travellers are affected by Brexit as well, those travelling from the UK to the EU, but also ones coming the other way from the EU to the UK. What are you noticing in terms of sort of what consumers are thinking and doing in terms of that?
Well, I suspect that the first many consumers will think about how Brexit has changed their travelling experience will be when their passport is stamped when they're in the European Union. I think from ABTA's perspective, what we have tried to do is to produce guidance for our members to help them deal with the challenges that the businesses are facing, but also to produce guidance for their consumers, their customers, that they can give out at the time of sale to say, okay, these are the steps you can take to protect yourself from that disruption. So things like checking the validity of your passport, making sure that you do have 3 months from the date of exit from the country you're visiting. That's the one that I think has caught a lot of people out, actually, over the last year or so. I know a friend of mine has just had exactly that, went to go on holiday last week to Greece, got to the airport, just under 3 months, couldn't go. So that is, I think that's the kind of, daily situation that customers will find starts to trip them up. As I say, I think it's on the industry to try and make sure that we're giving as much information to our customers to try and ensure that they're not hit by those challenges. And then for the businesses, engage with SBIT, engage with ABTA, your travel associations to try and understand, these challenges, whether it be mobility, tax, or indeed the information you need to be given to your customers.
Diane, obviously involved in a UK ski operator. I mean, how much do you think the responsibility does lay with the agencies, the tour operators, the providers to help consumers understand what Brexit means for their travellers? I mean, where does the line sort of be drawn between what consumers should do themselves and how you should be supporting them?
Well, I speak as both. I'm a consumer. I am the person that's gone to the wrong airport when I was going transatlantic. I'm just going to fess up to everybody. I'm not proud. £100 taxi fare later. That tells you it was a few years ago. But anyway, so I'm a consumer as well. And what I notice in my own behavior is I'm so used to it being dead easy that I rarely read my travel documents through thoroughly. I'm hoping there's people in the room that are agreeing with me, but certainly quite a few of our customers are the same. So I think the onus is on us to push notifications to customers, to really push out that information.
And how are you doing that?
At the moment, automatic emails. I was spending this morning writing them. I was spending this morning going back over our calendar of communications, the countdown to holidays, and going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. And before I knew it, I'd added 2 more emails, and I could feel the marketing department pulling their hair out and going, don't let her at that spreadsheet again. Because a colleague of ours came back from a cruise holiday recently, and he was besieged with emails. But he said at the end of it, there was no chance that I didn't know what to do. It was videos, it was emails, and so on. So
but there can also be information overload, right? People might just get fed up with it.
He said it was information overload. I couldn't believe there was another email coming in from X ferry company. But his final sentence was the goldmine that said, I had no doubt about what was going to happen and how it was going to be. So I feel that as onerous, at running a travel company. But I think we've got the future of the company, and we are used to, looking after people, frankly. The future of our industry is to lead the way in that, as it might be with green issues, just to broaden the discussion. I know it's about Brexit.
And of course, Luke, the COVID pandemic, it's made travel more difficult. We've had to do a lot more paperwork. We've had to check immigration rules for different countries, had to go onto different government websites. Depending how digital savvy you are, getting all that and all the different passes and all the different apps, it will depend on the consumer as well, right?
I think it does. I think for the industry, it's about making the message as simple as you can, as Diane's just given a very good example of reinforcing that message, push notifications before departure. I think there are ways that the industry can kind of try and simplify that message to the consumer to ensure that they do understand it. There's also, of course, Foreign Office advice, and we always advise that people check that before they travel. And ultimately, that's why we're all here, right? Travel agents, tour operators, we are the experts. So it's our job to hold the hands of the consumers and to give them as much information as we can. And I think what COVID has shown is actually the role of that travel expert has never been more important. And when you build Brexit on top of that, my advice would be book with a travel agent or book with a tour operator.
Yeah, brings a whole new definition to counsellor, doesn't it? Almost counselling through the trauma of having to deal with all the extra paperwork. Kerry, I don't like this word, but there's a new word swirling around, isn't there, called bleisure. It doesn't sound very pleasant, but a mixture of business and leisure. There will be people, as you know, within the business community that go away on business trips, as they have in the past, gone to Europe maybe for a couple of meetings, and then stayed on and extended a bit of a holiday. What does Brexit mean for that, and what kind of changes do you think that will bring in?
Indeed, and it's quite a challenge, because the 90 and 180-day rule, where you're allowed to go on business and it doesn't require a visa, incorporates both business travel and your leisure travel. So for our members that are managing corporate travel programs, they have systems in place at the minute that manage days in country on business for tax purposes. But their challenge is, how do they build in an individual's leisure travel to that system, because you don't want it getting mixed up with tax, obviously. But also it's a challenge of being able to educate your traveling workforce to say, we need to be mindful of how many days you're going on holiday in Europe, as well as how many you're going on business, and we need to pull it all together. So there's a whole piece around compliance, mandatory compliance training in organisations, and for individuals in those organisations being able to certify that they've read and understood it, and that they will record their leisure trips alongside their business trips, because you could get it to a point where you're at a tipping point in that 90 and 180 days.
And then that becomes quite personal to the employee, doesn't it? Because they might turn around and say, well, I want my 3 weeks in Spain in the summer. I'm not going to have enough holiday days left.
Indeed, and many of our travel managers within our membership base are reviewing their travel policy and reviewing exactly that, their leisure policy. Because some have previously allowed quite a lot of freedom, that somebody could travel on business and bolt on 5 days holiday, for example, out in San Francisco or wherever it might be. But now they're having to relook at that when it comes to Europe because of this rule as well.
And Luke, we've seen a rise, obviously, in a lot of remote working during the pandemic. People working in all sorts of different places, escaping to countries they like. If we're going to see more remote working in the future, so maybe a British national is on holiday somewhere and they do a bit of remote working at the same time, I mean, how does Brexit fall into all of that?
Well, I mean, it will depend on what work you are doing, I suspect. But, you know, a lot of national immigration systems have been adapting to this to try and attract people to their countries for the purposes of remote working over the last year. So I'm sure countries are kind of trying to make concessions in that regard. But it's about checking the rules in each country you go to. And again, it goes down, you know, the loss of freedom of movement is something that means that we are having to juggle with these rules that we haven't had to deal with for, what, 40 years.
Diane, we talked about the European Union and how different countries have different policies, and Luke was just mentioning it there. For the leisure travellers that you deal with, are they going to face different issues through the ski season, for example, in different countries, or is it one size fits all in that respect?
You've just named my worst nightmare. Don't worry, I'll take it to therapy. Yeah, they could do, because this morning I was delighted to receive an email from Swiss Tourism saying that the Swiss will accept the NHS COVID pass. That was this morning. Up until then, we had a scenario where our guests going to Switzerland would have to apply for a Swiss version of that. So my huge fear is that leaving the EU and any feelings against us may manifest itself in what is required health-wise and protocol-wise in different European countries. So it may be the case that all the windows are knocked out of the lifts. They won't be knocked out, they'll be opened. But anyway, they'll be knocked out of the lifts in France, and it may be family-only groups in France, and the pass sanitaire might have to be shown when you pick up your lift passes, where in Austria, that might not be the case. The likelihood is it would be the other way around, knowing the cultures of those countries. But that's the kind of thing that we face. Yeah. And we have the issue of teenagers in this country only having one vaccination, whereas in France it's 2, and so they're not counted as vaccinated. So you have a group of people staying in a ski resort. You know, we've got 72 bookings just over Christmas and New Year that have that age group of teenagers on them. Is there sufficient testing capacity in the ski resorts? There's currently one pharmacy in Maribel that's open, and it's booked up for the next 2 weeks. So I can see lots of teenagers being quite happy to stay on in Maribel waiting for their jab, and their schools and their parents thinking otherwise.
Luke, is there going to be ultimately a cost to consumers if those working in the travel sector have to incur more costs because of Brexit?
Well, it depends what businesses do. I mean, as Diane said earlier, that you have the option of kind of changing your business model. Perhaps that is employing EU nationals, using your European companies, particularly if you're a larger organisation. Or if you are going through far more bureaucracy and it is costing you more to take on staff, then yeah, ultimately that will be passed through to consumers and you will see holiday costs increase. And again, that's part of the message to government, both in destination, and we work very closely with destination governments around Europe, but also with the UK government, is to say, actually, we should try and avoid that. You know, if we take down these barriers, there is a benefit to the consumer here, to our people as well. And ultimately, as Diane said, that is the role of government, isn't it? To do what is best for your trade, for your commerce, and for your people. So I think it's part of our message for now. We haven't seen costs flowing through yet, but it's certainly a risk going forward, yeah.
How important is it, Diane, that you keep the costs down then?
Did you see the whispers on my face? Holidays, people booking holidays is about consumer confidence. And I was definitely one of those people in 2008 when the financial crisis hit. My mortgage payments decreased and I reined in my spending. I've never known that in my life. So we know, it's one of the things in the holiday industry that we find difficult to talk about. Now, I believe businesses are incredibly creative and resourceful, and it's our job to do exactly what Luke said, to be clever, leverage the cost down, change some business models, negotiate differently, think ways around. However, I think we would be lying if we don't say to consumers that costs are going to increase. Now, the marketing person in me says, well, you have to marry that with an increase in service. You have to marry that with telling the consumer, yes, prices are going to go up, but it's not just like energy, where it goes up and you can do nothing. The price goes up, we're going to try and add other things to your experience. We're going to try and innovate. We're going to try and inspire you differently. So it doesn't feel just what the energy companies are doing to us. Does it show I haven't put my heating on yet?
Kerry, within businesses that look after business travel, do you fear that Brexit is going to make business travel more expensive?
Do you know, I think, I don't know whether it will necessarily make business travel more expensive. More complicated, yes.
Yeah.
More expensive, I'm not 100% sure. But
companies are going to have to invest more time and effort into making business travel happen, right?
they absolutely are. But this is part of a much wider return to travel. There's been quite a seismic shift in terms of business travel as we look forward versus looking back, given that we've had this almighty pause in travel. So it is all about that responsible return to travel, and it is bringing in those other elements. It's bringing in a focus on sustainability. It's looking at post-pandemic requirement and what the value of a meeting is, alongside obviously taking into account this change in legislation. So I think there's all of those factors, and yes, it may make it more expensive because you've got an increased cost in specialist organisations, but that's a price you have to pay, the same way you have to pay a price in terms of covering testing for your employees. And all other requirements behind supporting, commercial trips or business necessary trips.
Luke, back in terms of business and leisure, I mean, as we mentioned before, climate is putting pressure on people to be a lot more sustainable in terms of how they travel and where they go away. I mean, the upshot of this is that Brexit might be good for the environment, right? There might be more people staying in the UK.
Well, I think for our industry, it's important to remember that carbon is the enemy when you're talking about sustainability, not travel. And travel is something that enriches us all. It's experiencing new languages, new cultures. It's something that we all want to do, and it makes life a more enjoyable experience, frankly. So I don't think people are going to want to travel less. It's how do we give them the tools to travel more responsibly, whether that be using cleaner methods of transport, whether it be using newer fleets of aircraft. Airlines are investing hugely in sustainable aviation fuels. We're part of Sustainable Aviation, the alliance that's committed to net zero by 2050. There's a lot going on to try and reduce the impact of travel and tourism around the globe, but I don't think we should lose sight of the benefits that travel and tourism brings either. It's an industry that's worth about $81 billion a year from the UK outbound around the world. That matters hugely to communities around the globe. People rely on us for their income. So I don't think you just say, well, you turn off all travel and that's great for the environment. It's a balance, isn't it? So it's giving the consumers the tools to see how they can reduce their own impact. It's showing them what companies are doing to reduce their impact on the environment. It's a kind of partnership working, not just between the industry and consumers, but also with government to invest in, the technologies that we need to get us to net zero by 2050. But I don't think, I think it's overly simplistic to just say people should stop traveling.
Diane, we don't have many ski resorts in the UK, maybe a few mountains up in Scotland maybe, but do you think that actually if Brexit becomes too bureaucratic for travellers alongside all the COVID restrictions, which might go on for some time to come yet, that people might just say, blow this, I'm going to stay at home?
It's a really good question, because I can see some of that happening already. That what we've got at the moment is a third of the bookings that we've got for the coming ski season are people who've deferred from either last year that didn't happen or a bit at the tail end of the 2020 season. Those people are like me, they're hobbyists, where if I can't hear that sound of my ski boots clicking into my skis, it's almost as bad as not having my coffee in the morning. So, the people who are booking now and who've deferred their holidays are the ones who are saying, you know what, it doesn't matter what bureaucracy is going to be going on, I'm still going to go.
Yeah.
And very many of those people have got 2 or 3 years worth of savings that they want to spend on their holidays. So we're seeing a definite trend in those people upgrading. On the other hand, as we're coming to balanced due dates, there's a group of people who are saying, it's a bit uncertain, I really don't know if I can be bothered to fill out a passenger locator form and get the test for the kids, I'm going to drop out. So we've kind of got a schizophrenic pattern in our bookings at the moment, and I think that's likely, for us in the winter season, perhaps winter sun as well, that's likely to carry on until some form of regularity and system and understanding begins to develop, and that would benefit the whole of the travel industry. And that brings us back to what you were saying about government. For goodness sake, after everything we've been through, people are more keen to travel than ever. let's try and introduce some certainty and stability in these regulations and rules, please.
I got a question here from one of our audience. Luke, thank you very much indeed for your question on Slido. Is there a sense that European countries are being particularly difficult as a punishment for Brexit? I mean, Luke, you're a Director of Public Affairs, so I guess you have a bit of an insight into that. Are they punishing us?
I don't think there's been much evidence of that, if I'm honest. I think, over the summer, these destinations flexed some of their entry requirements in order to get British citizens in. We weren't part of the EU COVID pass, but they allowed us in anyway. I think we've seen an approach where they recognise the importance of British travel to their markets and that they have tried to be as flexible as they can. Now, of course, there are challenges there. As Diane's just been talking about, particularly the area of family and group travel, we need more international cooperation around that. Governments have got to get their heads together and work out some kind of uniform rules for under 18s to enable people to travel globally, because different countries are doing different things around vaccination. And clearly that is a hugely valuable part of our industry, but I don't think it's a kind of punishment piece. I certainly haven't seen any evidence of that.
No, and I think we talked before, it's a really interesting question, because I think it's very easy to characterize opposition when you encounter it in that way. And I think I've told you a story that we were meeting a very high-profile politician in a region of France, and one of my colleagues started the meeting by saying, well, this is the issue, what are you going to do about it? And he sat bolt upright and said, well, I'm not going to do anything because you voted for Brexit. And we thought, oh gosh, the meeting's lost. Actually, 90% of the rest of the meeting was him working out a way of trying to deal with the volume of visas that we were likely to have. So I think that may be said, but actually when you account for a large amount of business in certain destinations and you make that explicit, which has been some of our joint work, you encounter the business pragmatism even from a politician. Mind you, he was flanked by two very prominent MPs on either side, so that might have helped.
Yeah. Listen, we're running out of time, but I just want to ask one kind of question to each of you just to wrap things up and to kind of look to the future. I mean, Kerry, it's all too easy to talk about the difficulties and the challenges that the industry, travel and tourism, is facing because of Brexit, and clearly there are some big challenges. But there must be some positives, right? I mean, how do you look to the future? I mean, there's some good things that Brexit's going to bring.
Well, I think there is always positive outlook, and I think for businesses, yes, Brexit has happened. It's what the UK voted and chose to do. I think as we move through and we see a return of business travel, there potentially will be some bilateral agreements that may come through to support social security or labour issues. And I think we will start to work through that as we move forward. There are absolutely solutions out there. There are some organisations that do an amazing job advising on immigration, social security, and providing technical solutions to be able to manage it. So there is opportunity for those organisations. We are where we are. We continue to raise challenges about maybe what isn't working, and we looked at how we can sort of try and smooth the way forward for our travellers moving forward. But again, Brexit is one issue that is affecting certainly our members in terms of the business travel sector, but there are other European pieces of legislation that affect all Europeans. So this is something that the EU member states and the UK are very closely connected in as we look forward to a return of business travel.
Okay, Luke, title of this session is How the Travel Industry Can Move On from Brexit. How can the travel industry move on from Brexit?
I think we need to continue to concentrate on areas where we can improve things. So I've spoken about some of the policy changes that have already been made around driving to try and eradicate some of the barriers there. We need that for mobility in particular, but we also need it for tax and other issues that are going to crop up for business. I mean, I do agree that, that I'm not sure I would say there's a huge opportunity as a direct result of Brexit, but there are things here that have been positive. The industry cooperation that has cropped up as a result of Brexit, the need to share information between businesses, that has been really good and is something that we need to take forward. It's actually been replicated around COVID as well, hasn't it? The industry's really had to collaborate in order to survive. Myself, I've been running Safe Future Travel, the coalition of 16 travel associations for the last 18 months, bringing together pretty much all of the UK's leading travel associations. So there's been some positives that have come out of all of the challenges we've faced recently. There's also the improved bilateral relationships, or certainly scope for improved bilateral relationships with countries within the EU, where potentially previously we would have been negotiating at European level, and now we're re-engaging at that bilateral level, which could be positive. But I wouldn't say, for our industry, we left the European Union and this automatic trading opportunity was there. No, I don't believe that's the case, really. I think it's been a sign of the resilience and innovation of our sector that we've made some positives out of it.
Diane, any optimism in there?
I feel really sad about the colleagues that we had to lose through redundancy over the period. I think that as we come out of this, there's a chance to rebuild. I still have most of their telephone numbers on my phone and said, we'll contact you again. Because what opportunities does it present for us? Well, we've gone this far with the worst combination us in the travel industry could ever have envisaged. A pandemic and Brexit, all of that uncertainty. Are we taking a huge bitter pill in one go? Perhaps we are. Does it mean that our ability to use technology will be enhanced? Those businesses that have made it are, sorry to sound like a politician, flexible and agile and viable. Sorry, I'm giving away my politics there. How dare you call those businesses unviable? Anyway, so we are left with a much smaller industry, but perhaps we should be thinking, how now do we really lobby our politicians about the value that we bring to this economy? Because I wonder if the silence from our politicians around Brexit came from just us not blowing our own trumpet, as sectors like the finance industry does.
Okay, Diane, thank you. Does anyone in the audience have a question? If you want to raise your hand, if you have a question for anyone? No? Ah, this gentleman here. If we could just get the microphone across to you. What's the gentleman?
Hi, Liz Smales from Welcome to Yorkshire. A lot of it has been about the outbound travel. We're obviously interested in the inbound travel and how easy it's been made for the European markets to come to us, certainly for the MICE industry. And is there evidence that there's Brexit politics at play going elsewhere for that and not considering the UK at all?
Karim, maybe?
I mean, certainly from the business travel side of things, again, for business travellers coming into the UK, they will still face the same considerations around, the posted worker or A1 social certificates or, certainly Brexit implications. So they will still have, there's no sense that it's more difficult for one side or the other to conduct business for those regular business trips across. I'm not sure whether...
Luke?
Yeah, well, I think... Our own government has done such an effective kind of job of putting up barriers to inbound tourism over the last year that I'm not sure it needs other countries particularly to take a view on the attractiveness of the UK. If you think about the testing requirements, the self-isolation, the managed quarantine, all of that we had all throughout the summer that no other destination, certainly in Europe, had. I don't think it came down to the 97% fall that has been in inbound tourism this year. I'm not sure that was to do with other countries picking on us. I think it was about sort of us picking on ourselves, to be honest. I suspect we're not going to see other countries trying to restrict us. I think the onus falls on the UK government to make the UK an attractive place to visit and to invest for MICE events again. And I think there are some positive signs there, actually. The government's really engaged. The Tourism Recovery Plan does focus quite a lot on rebuilding the events sector and rebuilding inbound tourism. So there are some positive signs there, but as I say, over last year, I'm not sure it would be other countries taking a view on us. I think it would be what we've done in terms of our own restrictions getting into the UK.
Okay, Luke. Anybody else? Any questions? Okay, good. Hopefully that answered your question well. Thank you very much indeed for that. So let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thank you, everyone, for watching this afternoon as well. Thank you.